My 17-year-old 4Runner is the newest vehicle that I own. I prefer these 3 old Toyotas for a good reason, and it's not just because I can't afford a brand new one, although I definitely can't afford a brand new one. And I'm not the only one that thinks these older vehicles are better. As a matter of fact, I polled nearly 10,000 people, and here's what they had to say. Did you know that roughly 20% of car buyers are actually making their decision based on the monthly payment and not the overall cost of the vehicle? Ever wonder how manufacturers are convincing people to spend $100,000 on a pickup truck? That's exactly how. 50 grand for a base model Tacoma? That's crazy. Your payment will only be like $400 every 2 weeks. Oh, that's not too bad. Buying an older Toyota doesn't just mean a lower purchase price, it means less depreciation too. Or there's even the chance that it could go up in value, because there's always going to be those guys that say, they don't make them like they used to. Great example is our Tacoma. My wife bought that thing years ago for like 5,000 bucks. And if I were to sell it today, I could get at least double that much for it. Now, can you picture a brand new Tacoma reselling for like $130,000, $140,000? Because I sure can't. But this video isn't all about personal finance and numbers. Let's get back to talking about cars. But before we do that, we have to talk about coffee. Thank you.
How you doing?
You too. This is a double-double from Tim Hortons, a staple in Canadian culture. Tim Hortons has been able to build an entire empire based on selling great coffee at a large scale. Anyone that's been to the Great White North knows that you can stand on pretty much any street corner and hit the front door of a Tim Hortons with a booger if you flick it hard enough. They're everywhere. This coffee, though, is actually kind of crappy. You see, Tim Hortons coffee used to be awesome. It really was the best. But then, for whatever reason, they decided to cut costs and switch to a different coffee supplier. Obviously, the quality went down the drain at that point, and a new player emerged, McDonald's. Yeah, the burger people. They wanted to expand to more of a cafe experience, and so they scooped up the old Tim Hortons coffee supplier and got it for themselves. So did all the Canadian lumberjacks switch to McDonald's as their new favorite hangout spot, since that's where the good coffee is now? No. Everybody still goes to Tim Hortons. They've been able to count on people's loyalty to a brand that was built so long ago, and it's still Canada's favorite coffee to this day, despite not even being very good anymore. So why am I telling a story about coffee in a video about cars? Well, it's because the same thing is happening with Toyota and their reputation for reliability. The question is, if they continue heading in this direction, will they be able to survive based on their old reputation that was built so long ago? Also, in this whole analogy, who is McDonald's? Is it Nissan, perhaps, with their Frontier pickup truck? Makes you wonder. So has Toyota completely lost its way? Well, their focus has definitely changed from reliability to efficiency and emissions. In the 90s and the early 2000s, Toyota was all about making simple, basic, dependable vehicles, and every once in a while, one of them was pretty fun to drive. The biggest complaint that anybody has about these older Toyota trucks, aside from the rust of course, has just been that they're pretty thirsty. Fuel economy was never Toyota Truck's thing. The current lineup of Toyota trucks offers nothing but small displacement turbocharged engines, which are indeed a lot better on gas, but in turn it's opened up a new can of worms that is putting their reputation for reliability in jeopardy. And it's not entirely their decision, it's just the direction that the government is kind of pushing them to go. And to give Toyota credit, at least they're not going, everything should be EV now. They're staying open-minded and they're looking for different solutions. A quick online search will show a lot of complaints from people that are finding little quirks and annoyances with their new Toyota vehicles. Everything from their windows rattling in their 3rd gen Tundra to the transmission failing in their brand new Tacoma. Yeah, there's some nasty stories out there right now. This kind of stuff didn't used to happen with Toyota, especially with models like the 4Runner and the Land Cruiser that have always been built in Japan. Recently I saw that TRD John replaced his 3rd gen Tundra Platinum, which was a beautiful top-of-the-line pickup truck. He traded it in on a 2nd gen TRD Pro Tundra. A lot of people would consider that a pretty big downgrade. And he's a huge Toyota fan. As a matter of fact, people have accused him of being like a little bit too blindly loyal to the brand with his views on the vehicles and stuff. But to see him take a step back and switch to an older vehicle is pretty interesting to say the least. Another complaint that people have about Toyota is their recent partnerships that they've made. Yeah, the GR86 is a Subaru and the Supra is just a BMW. I'm not a fan of this either, but I can actually kind of understand why they did it because, Toyota knew that they weren't going to sell a huge number of Supras, and to spend the millions of dollars on developing a brand new engine and chassis and everything for this, just to essentially lose money on it would not be a very good business decision. Compared to, say, the Corollas and the Camrys, they don't sell anywhere near as many Supras. But my only question, though, is if you're going to borrow from something else that already exists, why not make a Toyota version of the Lexus LC500? They already have that platform, and that's what the Supra was in the past with the SC300. Those were Lexus versions of the Supra. The truth is, Toyota is no stranger to partnerships, even back in the good old days. But it's worth noting, though, that the Toyotas were still built by Toyota. Now, they did work very closely with Yamaha to develop their sort of like sportier engines like the 4AG, the 2ZZ, the 3S, the 2JZ, even the engine in the LFA. This relationship dates all the way back to the 1960s with the 2000 GT, which was like their first sports car. I've seen some comments on here saying that Yamaha built Toyota's engines for them, and that's not quite the case. They outsourced some of the engineering and the design work for the heads on some of these. They kind of had like the overall design, and then they'd pass it off to Yamaha and say, can you make this flow a little better? Can you kind of step this up a notch and really get it to be optimized? Now, if you ask me, partnering with a fellow Japanese company that shares the same ethics and standards and goals as you do, that's not a problem. Taking a BMW and putting a different body on it and then giving it the most legendary name in the world of Toyotas, that's a big problem.
Idiot!
Now, before I move on to the fact that the older ones are more reliable, check out these t-shirts that I had made. We've got one with the Tacoma on here, miles mean nothing, and then this one is for the 4th Gen 4Runner, old as gold. I've been wanting to make something for you guys for quite a while, but I couldn't get past the whole Canadian Gearhead logo and the fact that I think like 80% of my audience is American. You guys aren't going to want to buy something that's got Canada on it. So these just have this logo on the front here. The Tacoma one has a little Tacoma on there, and then the 4Runner has the 4Runner. There's no word Canadian on any of these. So if you want to support the channel, head over to CanadianGearhead.com and buy yourself 30 minimum each. I gotta feed my kid. The fact is, these older Toyotas are a lot more reliable. They've got fewer electronic systems to break down. I think it's pretty obvious that the less electronics and moving parts that a vehicle has, the more reliable it'll be. Now, I do have faith in Toyota's ability to engineer things properly. They're kind of running through a tough time right now with some of these recalls and some of these quality issues, but I think they will get there. It's just these first couple of model years on the newer trucks is just not pretty right now. After all, if you think about it, these early 2000s trucks can be considered like complicated compared to, say, a 1st gen with a 22 RE. And yet, these have passed the test of time. They have proven over and over again that they are well built. But in recent years, Toyota has had to throw a ton of technology at their vehicles in order to remain competitive with all the other automakers. All three of these fire up and drive every single time, and these two trucks are both daily drivers, and the car here has been making more than double the original horsepower for more than 15 years. I don't consider myself an expert mechanic, but I've been able to turn this Tacoma from this to this. The way that these trucks were put together, it just makes sense, and they don't require any special tools to work on or anything. It's a lot of 10 and 12 millimeter bolts and a lot of snaps and clips, and they're just overall very basic the way that they're assembled. I feel comfortable figuring things out as I go while I'm working on this thing, but you know what I'm not comfy with? Working on a hybrid system.
Stop, you gotta go.
Woo! I find the older Toyotas are more engaging to drive than the newer ones in terms of steering and throttle, things like that. The problem is that the new vehicles being sold are also good that they basically all feel the same. You can't tell the difference anymore. And I'm using the word feel loosely because you really can't hear or feel much at all. They're just not very connected to the road. Why am I using air quotes so much all of a sudden? Modern vehicles are so focused on comfort with tons of sound deadening and super soft steering so you can turn the steering wheel with your pinky finger and not spill your iced vanilla latte. It's just not for me. I love the heavier steering feel that you get in these older Toyota trucks that you just don't get in the modern ones. You feel much more connected to the road. And this one doesn't even have power steering at all. Whether or not these trucks look better than the new 4Runner or the new Taco coming out is totally a matter of opinion, but I think we can all agree that the styling was definitely more subdued. I think the current lineup of Toyotas actually looks great, but the problem with styling that's bold like this is that it might not age well. Subtle styling is more likely to become timeless, like the MR2 or the 3rd Gen 4Runner or even the 200 series Land Cruiser. Those are just never going to be outdated looking. I feel like these older Toyotas just have a little more charm and character. There's just something about them. You know, like people nowadays are really learning to appreciate anything that's old or vintage, and right now pretty much anything from the 90s is just automatically cool. It's almost natural for people to assume that something must be well built if it comes from a different era, and honestly I think that it does check out with these older Toyotas. They're just built really well. Let's face it, anybody can walk into a Toyota dealership and order a brand new one, but keeping these older ones in good condition and running properly takes a certain level of pride and passion, and those are two things that I think the automotive community could use a little bit more of these days. So let's deprive ourselves of huge infotainment screens and massaging seats and all this crazy stuff so we can preserve these older Toyotas, hopefully that they'll last long enough that our kids will be able to enjoy them just as much as we do. So if you want to join me, go ahead and subscribe to this channel, watch this video next, and don't forget to buy a t-shirt.